The Chairman of the Presidential Task Force, honorable ministers, members of the PTF, gentlemen of the press, good evening. So I'll be taking you through some of the changes. As the Chairman said, we are extending phase 2 of the response with slight modifications. The PTF has identified certain areas of concern that require attention and which will undergo further revision. These are particularly areas involved with international air travel, entertainment activities, educational sector services, and public and private sector services. The PTF in the past has stated that the aim of phase 2 was to sustain the gains from earlier steps and phases in terms of the pandemic control. It's also important to state that we relax the response partly to enable additional sectors of the economy restart activities. In this regard, we seek to consolidate the gains in the areas of the economy while trying to ensure better compliance with the health-based response. Specifically, therefore, the following areas will be sustained and/or modified under the extended phase of the eased lockdown as approved by Mr. President. The current nationwide curfew will remain. We will maintain restrictions on mass gatherings and sporting activities. Domestic aviation services will recommence. Movement across state boundaries will be allowed, but only outside curfew hours. Students in graduating classes, only graduating classes, primary 6, JS3, and SS3 will be allowed to resume in preparation for examinations. Federal and state government offices will maintain their current timing with only essential staff allowed at the same level of grade level 14 and above to resume work. The use of face masks remains mandatory, and we will be enforcing this at all levels, including linking up with state governments. Access to government and commercial premises will not be allowed if you are not wearing a face mask. In other words, no mask, no entry. No mask, no services will be provided in government premises and commercial premises. I'll now briefly take you through some of the changes in greater detail. Some haven't changed that much. So the curfew, for instance, remains at 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. nationwide. People are allowed to go out for work and to buy necessary food and exercise, as well as continuing to move between local governments, especially in areas that are not high burden local governments. But we still strongly recommend avoiding unnecessary contact with people. For the aviation industry is allowed to resume domestic operations as soon as practicable in line with existing international and local guidelines on COVID-19. For interstate travel, movement across state borders will be allowed only outside curfew times, effective from the 1st of July, to allow the industry to prepare over the next 24 hours. In particular, we expect the transport industry to adhere to the Federal Ministry of Transportation safety protocol and guidelines that will be released. Specifically in relation to parks and terminals, there will be restricted access with disinfection and sanitization. Waiting areas for passengers must have social distancing measures. There has to be posters and notices on conduct of persons. Temperature checks. If you are not wearing a mask, you will not be allowed entry into the parks and terminals. We also expect transporters to arrange for crowd control. Buses should have a maximum of 50% capacity. For bus trips, we strongly urge windows to be kept open, particularly for short trips, and face mask is mandatory. State governments, through their commissioners of transport, shall undertake inspection of facilities and confirm compliance as a precondition to resumption of interstate travel. And non-compliance with the guidelines will result in withdrawal of permission to operate interstate mass transit. The PTF expects this to be enforced at the state level. For interstate travel, we will maintain the occupancy level for buses to 50% and 2 passengers for taxis, but we will restrict movement in high-burden local government areas to essential travel only. This will be part of the hotspot strategy that will be introduced. For industry and labor, we'll maintain normal working hours based on the curfew arrangements, apart from government offices that will have a separate working hour schedule. But offices must maintain working at 75% capacity. For banks and financial institutions, they will operate normal working hours with no change. For government offices, there is no specific change. Working hours remain 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. with from grade level 14 and above. For personalized services, mechanics, artisans, hair salons, etc., who own their workshops or workstations and can clearly adhere to non-pharmaceutical interventions will be permitted to operate as normal. For markets, there is no specific change to what we already have in phase 2, and this will be driven by local authority arrangements. For hotels, restaurants, and eateries, there is no specific change. Hotels must observe all mandatory non-pharmaceutical interventions. Restaurants to remain closed for eat-in with strict cleanliness guidelines, except for restaurants that are serving hotel residents. Bars, gyms, cinemas, event centers, and nightclubs remain closed, and this will be enforced. For educational activities, daycare and primary schools, all daycares and primary schools to remain closed till further evaluation. Schools are encouraged to continue with e-learning and visual teaching, but pupils may proceed to take the National Common Entrance as soon as is feasible, provided there is compliance with issued non-pharmaceutical interventions. For secondary and tertiary institutions, all schools to remain closed till further evaluation. Arrangements to be made for exiting graduating students in JS3 and SS3 to resume at both boarding and day schools as soon as possible for intensive revision exercises. All educational establishments are to conduct exhaustive reviews to ensure compliance with the issued guidelines on COVID-19 before they open up for this purpose. And just to clarify, they will open up only for the purpose of exiting students. Arrangements to be made for students taking part in the NAPTEP and BEC exams, WAEC examinations, NECO, and sub-exams, respectively. All schools must comply with the 6 recommended steps and required measures to be issued by the Federal Ministry of Education before an institution is reopened in the timeline to be provided. For churches and mosques, no specific change. Phase 2 remains. For recreational parks / communal sports, restriction on communal sports remains, and as well as the restriction on recreational parks until further evaluation. For funerals and weddings, no particular change. funerals and weddings to be limited to 20 people, including close family members. In summary, the PTF has recommended to Mr. President, and Mr. President has approved the extension of phase 2 of the response with minor modifications. We are requesting for full compliance by the general public. We have to get this right this time round. We really need to stop playing Russian roulette with our lives, because if we continue to expose ourselves to COVID, there's no doubt that people will die. We also call on all the political leaders, the community, and religious leaders to continue to support us, the PTF, to make sure that the communities are aware of the risks and compliance is improved. I'll stop here, and we will take any further questions that might arise. We have ministers from the various MDAs that will be happy to take further questions. Thank you.